afternoon. I hope that everyone is having a splendid day so far. Thank you for taking the time to join me for this talk about open source beyond the repo. For those of you who do not know me personally, my name is Catherine. I am a software engineer. I work in the input-output engineering team. A little bit about me personally. I am a huge fan of history, technology, local community development initiatives, and bull mastiffs. If you would like to connect with me personally, here is a QR code. You can scan this and it'll take you to my LinkedIn page. Quick overview of today's agenda. First, we are going to start off with an overview of software and open source. What is the history behind it? Where did this industry begin and how did it evolve over time? Then we are going to take a look at some of the accomplishments the open source initiative has achieved since its inception. And we'll also touch on what are some areas for improvement within the world of open source software development. And finally, I'm going to give you a sneak peek behind the scenes of an inside project that Input Output has been working on for how we can double down on our commitment to developing projects that in a more accountable, transparent, and collaborative manner. So, before we start off our tour of the history of open source, I do want to get a feel for the room. Can I get a show of hands? How many people have heard of open source and work on open source projects today? Okay, great. And can I get a show of hands? How many of you are familiar with the history of the open source initiative? One person. Okay, great. So majority of people will be learning some things today, which I love that. All right, so before we begin, I would like for everyone to put on your imagination caps, and we are going to travel back in time to the 1950s and the 1960s, where our story will begin. During this period in time, the way in which people thought about software was much different from the way that we think about it today. The way people thought about software during this period in time was that software was essentially a feature that was used to improve how hardware functioned. And essentially, hardware manufacturers, they would develop software, they would bundle it with the hardware for free, and they would give it away for free to the users, sort of like a value-added service. Now, the people that actually interacted with software, they were primarily a small group of technological enthusiasts or engineers or researchers who were working at top universities, government institutions, or large corporations. And the way that they viewed software was drastically different from how we view software today. They thought that software was essentially something very akin to research papers, and it is something that should live in the public domain of knowledge. It was something that was open for anyone to be able to go learn about and study and modify and share those updates with everyone who wanted to be involved with a project. However, this would all begin to change in 1969. Prior to this, throughout the 1950s and the 1960s, IBM was the dominant hardware manufacturer. And just like everyone else, they would develop their software, package it along with the hardware, and give it away for free. Now, while software didn't have its own unique market value as a standalone product during this period in time, there were individuals who were looking to the future, and they saw the potential of what software could one day be. And they wanted to build a business around this idea. However, when they went to actually sell their services to consumers, they had a really hard time justifying why should people pay a price for something that IBM is essentially giving away for free. And this caused a lot of tension within the market, and it became such a big issue that the Department of Justice even filed a lawsuit against IBM, claiming that their tactics of bundling hardware and software together stifled innovation, and it made it much harder for these third-party manufacturers to be able to compete. So, IBM decided to take a step back, and they said, you know what? Have it your way. If you would like, what we are going to do is we will unbundle the software from the hardware, we'll package it up, give it a price, and you can buy that separately. And that's just what they did. And this created an instant shift within the market, because now we had the market leader stating that software was its own unique product that had distinct value. And soon, all of the other manufacturers followed suit, and they started to do the same thing. We also had a bunch of new companies who just wanted to develop software who started to emerge during this period in time. And as more and more competition grew, people wanted to be able to protect their intellectual property, so they started to implement things like copyrights and end-user license agreements. So what we have is we start to see this shift take place where we go from this free and open and collaborative environment in which people are developing software towards one that is now closed source and proprietary. And several people who were familiar with the original ways of working when it was much more open and collaborative, they took notice of what was happening. And this was something that was morally and philosophically a big issue for them. One such individual was Richard Stallman. He is a brilliant engineer who worked at the MIT AI labs throughout the 1970s and 1980s. And he was particularly frustrated by this issue. He viewed software as something that was a contribution to all of society, and it was something that massively helped with collaboration inside of the entire scientific community. But not only was this a moral and a philosophical issue for Richard, it was soon going to become a practical one as well. One day, when Richard was working at the MIT AI lab, they received this fancy new state-of-the-art Xerox printer. And as with any new state-of-the-art technology, this printer happened to be a bit buggy. What would happen is someone would go and they would try and print something, and printers took a lot longer during this period in time. So they would wait a bit, and then they would go check the printer to see if what they had wanted to print came out. Only there was an issue. It turns out that Tom down the hall was also wanting to print something at the same time, and there was a scheduling conflict within the software. So the printer would be jammed, and they would have to go in, and they would fix it, and then they would go back. They'd type in a command to print something out. They'd wait a bit of time. They would go back, check the printer, and it turns out Janice from the 7th floor in accounting also wanted to print something at the same time, and the printer was jammed again. So it was becoming a headache to use this new printer. Now, typically, what people like Richard would have done in this situation is the manufacturers would provide the source code along with the hardware. So they'd go in, they'd inspect it, they'd see what's causing this bug, they'd modify it, and they'd share those modifications with everyone so anyone who experienced this issue could benefit from that. Only this time, when Richard went in to actually modify the source code, he did not have access to it. He even ended up calling Xerox on the phone and said, hey, you have some buggy software. Can you give me access to your source code? We have a proprietary scheduler we've built. We can fix this, and you can share that with whoever you want. And they said, I'm sorry, we cannot do this. This is proprietary technology. Through some means, Richard even found out that someone at a different university actually had access to the source code. And he thought, well, we're both in the scientific community. Can you give me access? And then we can both solve this issue together. Only this person said, I'm sorry, my hands are tied. I've already signed an NDA. So this was something that was a moral issue. It was a philosophical issue. It was making it practically difficult to fix things that these engineers would have originally done on their job, and it was stifling collaboration within the broader community. So, in an attempt to remedy this situation that was happening, in 1983, Richard decided to do several things. One of which is he created the Free Software Foundation. And when I say free, I don't mean free as in price, money, dinero, anything like that. I mean free as in an inherent right. such as freedom of speech. People like Richard, they believed that in the information age, you should have certain freedoms to access software. And they described 4 core tenets of what it meant for something to be free software. So 1, you should have the freedom to run the program for any purpose. You should have the freedom to study how the program works and to be able to change it. You should have the freedom to share copies with the program with anyone, and the freedom to improve the program and release those improvements. While the free software movement was able to make a number of technical accomplishments, they began working together to create something called the GNU operating system, which is an open source operating system. They found it really challenging to get businesses to want to adopt this way of developing software. The reason being that when they came to pitch this to businesses, they found that the messaging was too political, too confrontational, and there was nothing in it that made businesses want to adopt this. But that would all begin to change throughout the 1990s. One thing that began to make this practical was the introduction of the internet. And we all know how impactful that has been on all of our lives. But one thing in particular that the internet allowed to happen was this was the first time in history where you could have anyone across the globe who is interested in working on a shared project collaborate together on solving these problems. And several people actually saw the potential that the internet had to do this. One such individual was Linus Torvalds. He had this dream to create something called the Linux kernel. And he knew this was going to be a massive undertaking. This was something no one person could complete all on their own. So what Linus decided to do is he took the source code, he put it online, and he said, anyone who is interested in helping me out, let's build this together. And next thing you knew, he had tons of people who were wanting to contribute and to help him to deliver this Linux kernel. And this meant he had more developers working on this project that he would not have otherwise had access to had he decided to develop this in a closed source environment. This meant that with more minds working on this, they could come up with more innovative ideas. They could develop code even quicker. They could spot bugs and resolve them much quicker. And several individuals who were actually a part of the free software movement, they took note of what was happening. And they thought, we really have something here. We can finally get businesses to adopt this way of developing software. So, in 1998, what they did is they coined the term open source. They took all of that free software movement messaging and they packaged it up into something that was more business friendly and something that actually conveyed the value that businesses would get by adopting to develop software in an open source way. Additionally, they also created clearer guidelines for what it meant for something to be open source. And they provided support to businesses that wanted to adopt this way of working, but didn't quite have the know-how for how to implement it in a practical sense. And one of the last things that they did that was really impactful is they allowed for acceptance of a greater number of license types that would all fall within that open source umbrella. Fast forward to today, and I think it is fair to say that the Open Source Foundation achieved their dream of getting mainstream adoption of open source methodologies. And we have several stats that we can look to back up this claim. The first is that if you look at the foundational information that runs the web, such as web servers or hosting providers or security technology, there's a lot of open source technology and projects that are embedded within this fundamental web infrastructure. Additionally, prior to the open source initiative, the dominant market leader in terms of operating systems for a very, very long time was Microsoft's operating system. But today, it is now Android, which is built on top of open source components. If we look at projects like TensorFlow, PyTorch, or Hugging Face, these are open source projects that are used massively by many businesses to bootstrap their AI or data science applications. And if we look at LLMs in particular, the large language models that are being developed in an open manner are able to build something much quicker that sometimes compete at or above the benchmarks of closed proprietary models. And then if we look at a lot of the large tech companies today, like Microsoft, Google, Meta, Red Hat, IBM, a lot of these companies, they do fund open source projects, whether it's internally, they're funding their own team to work on something, or they are funding a third-party company that develops open source software. So now I want to get some feedback from the room. For any of you who have worked in open source before, beyond just the idea of opening up your code for people to contribute to, is there any best practices that you think we should start making a standard for open source projects to follow? Visibility, we hear. Okay, that's a good one. Any others? Okay, we'll come back to you. That's fine. All right, so these are some of the ways that the input-output engineering team has been thinking about this problem internally. One of the things that I think is really important, it's not enough that you have the code being open. We want to be able to figure out how can we open source the entire end-to-end development lifecycle. So starting with open roadmaps and open project boards. These are something that need to be more accessible to the community that you are developing things alongside with. You need to have an avenue for people to figure out what are the core priorities you're working on? What is the status of those priorities? If I'm a developer that wants to contribute to your project, how can I do so in a meaningful way that my work is in alignment with your goals? So having these open project boards and these open roadmaps can help assist with that. Another thing is to be able to surface real or near-time development insights that are taking place throughout the repositories. And this helps with a couple things. One, it allows for the team that is developing a project to showcase all of the work that's happening behind the scenes. And two, this allows for greater accountability. If your project is being funded by a VC or a community of people, you can have something to point to say, these are the deliverables we're working on, and here's how our development is tracking towards that. And lastly, you need to be able to allocate all of these things into a single dashboard where everyone can find all the information they're looking for, roadmaps, meaningful insights, time-sensitive data, and useful links. Input-Output is a company that has had a long-standing commitment to open source. If you look at a lot of the projects today, most of them are open sourced under the Apache 2 or MIT license. You can go to the repositories, you can read through the code, you can figure out how it works, you can branch it and try and make your own modifications to that. Now, us at the Input-Output engineering team want to double down on this commitment and figure out how can we develop tools to enhance what we're already doing in terms of open source development. And I'm going to give you a sneak peek of what that looks like. So this is something, just a caveat this is all dummy data, so don't think this is real. But this is something that internally we are calling the 24/7 development dashboard. Basically how it works is at the top you have a banner that is an informational banner. Anyone who comes to this dashboard will get timely insights. Say if you have a test net and you're going to mainnet, you need to be able to convey that information to users. So we have a banner for all this time-sensitive information. And as we scroll down on the page, we come to the crown jewel of the development dashboard. So you can see a commit feed of all of the development activity that is taking place across all of the different repositories. But not only that, you get this globe where you can actually see where in the world this development activity is happening. So it's really a showcase of a global workforce all working together to develop this protocol. So as we scroll down the page, if anyone has ever worked on an open source project or wanted to be involved with the open source project someone else is working on, you can realize that sometimes there's multiple different repositories. And if you want to get development insights, one, you have to locate all of those repositories. And two, you'll have to flip-flop back and forth to get an aggregated view of all those metrics. So we've done all that heavy lifting for you. And we've provided this consolidated view of the entire development activity taking place. So this is all of the code so far, and you can go back in time to see the development activity that happened 3 months ago, 30 days ago, within the past 7 days. Additionally, we have insights about the contributions that have happened over the last 12 months. And if we scroll up here, we have something that is akin to a roadmap or a burn down chart. This milestone section is essentially the definition of done for a project. So we have these high-level milestones where you can see when exactly did they start, when do we estimate these specific deliverables will be completed by, and you can see the status. So we can see the Rust simulation is 100% closed out, and the layers analysis at scale, we see it's about 50% done. On the left-hand side, we have a view where you can see more specific information about the ticket status of a project. So you can see how many are complete, how many are in review, how many are in progress, and how many are in backlog. And we also have a date switcher here, so you can go back in time and see how the work for this project has evolved over this period. And lastly, we wanted to provide some useful links. So if you come across this dashboard and you actually want to know more about the project itself and get involved, we provided these links so you can find the documentation, find the SIP, find any of these simulations. All of the repositories are here. And then we have this new section where you can see the latest blog posts and research papers that have been published. So this is all great, but the question that may be on all of your mind is, when can I view this? And I have an answer for you. So, in honor of being transparent, here is my roadmap that we have been working off of. So you can see for phase 1, this is all the work that's been completed so far. This beautiful purple star is illustrating where we are at today. We did want to have something that was ready, this proof of concept that we could bring to Rare so we can start having a conversation with all of you nice folks to see, is there any other information that you would like to have added to this type of site? But after Rare is over, we're going to go home and we are going to prepare this for the public launch that will take place in September. So that is all for me today. You all have been very kind. Thank you so much for standing here and listening to my talk. If you would like to discuss this dashboard more, if you have some insights on how this can be improved, I will be right over there. I'd love to chat. Please come find me. And that's all, folks.